YouTube, welcome to Jackie's Literary Corner. I am Jackie and I am here to do a review of Jane Seymour, The Haunted Queen. This is the third book in Alison Weir's Six Tudor Queen series. Jane was the third wife of Henry VIII. She was a lady. She was sent by her family to be a lady's maid to Catherine first. And like Catherine, she was very pious and loyal to the old faith before the reforms happened, and just very kind, loving, sweet person, or at least that's the impression we get in this fictional take on her story. And she did not like Anne. She thought Anne was a usurper of her and of Catherine's marriage to Henry. Like I said, she was very loyal to Catherine, and she thought Anne was a bitch. But in this story, she didn't immediately go after Henry or anything. Because she was a lady's maid to Anne, but then when Anne was starting to get, because she wasn't giving Henry an heir, and he was getting incredibly frustrated, and she was angry and bitter and frustrated herself. She kept disappointing him and not giving him a son, and she became very demanding, and she was very much all about reform and changing the Bible and changing the Bible to English so that everybody could read it. And of course, people like Jane did not support that, were against that. But then Henry started to notice Jane, and he started to like her because she was a very sweet person and listened to what he had, let him vent his feelings and frustrations. And her family, particularly her brothers, saw this as an opportunity. Her brothers, who are very ambitious, saw, this could help them in status and get them rank and be part of the king's court. And eventually, Henry and Jane started a love affair. And you guys know the rest. What happened to Anne, and she eventually was gone. And Jane was kind of persuaded to, talk bad about Anne, whisper, be the devil on Henry's shoulders. And she did not like that. And she kind of, in the story, it's implied that she felt guilty and felt bad for Anne. And every time she would feel bad, Anne would give her a reason to not like her. And I guess if you guys know your history, you know that Jane is the only one who gave him a son. This was really good. I mean, Jane is a very likable character. Like I said, she reminded me of Catherine in a lot of ways. She was, had strong faith. It was just a kind, loving person, but she also had a conscience. She felt guilty, but she justified herself, but you can't really blame her. And it was hard for her. It would be hard to say no to King Henry. He's handsome, he's charming, he's very loving, very passionate person, and he's the king. And he was very much, and when he's obsessed and in love with you, well, it's kind of hard to say no to that. She resisted him for a while, like Anne, but not in a sense, she wasn't, messing with him like Anne is portrayed to be doing. She wasn't trying to play a game with him or anything, or at least that's the impression I got in this book. But of course she does end up, because in my thing, and I feel like he was just, after his experience with Anne, I think he was ready for someone who was more just a sweet, good, moral person. Someone who was very, all about traditional values and would be more than willing to be an obedient wife. And she was. There were things that she didn't agree with. And once they were married, when she and Henry were married, Jane started to see a side of him that she did not like. But, of course, she also, in the story, also blames Anne for Henry being cruel and a mean person and angry all the time. Even though he has his own free will, and I think people, like, just like with Catherine, I think she assumes that he's, not Mr. Perfect, but that she thinks he doesn't make his own decisions, that he's influenced easily by others. And I think that is somewhat true. But I also think he is very much, he's very religious, but he's also likes power, likes being in charge, and likes things to go his way. But he's also, that's what he's led to believe, that things should go his way because he's the king. He has the power. Everyone has to listen to him. Everyone has to do what he says because he is the king. And which is really frustrating for a modern, as reading this in these modern times when kings, or at least in Europe, and it's not, people leading our countries they don't have power like kings anymore. They have to answer to governments. And so it's like hard to even fathom this in this world where you just can't say no to the king, and the king is so caught up in his, everything's all about me. You have to listen to what I say. It's all, what I say goes. I make the rules. You have to. And this, of course, Jane was during the time of reform because Anne had just died after the reform got started. So Anne was there to witness all this and all these monasteries, and she's very much defends the monastery. She doesn't understand why he feels the need to destroy all these monasteries. But he keeps telling her that they're all full of people acting naughty and misbehaving and being selfish and committing sins and debauchery and all that, and she does not believe that. She feels, and this is the beginnings of Cromwell. His rise. I mean, he started to rise, around the time that Anne was still alive. But I think this is where you really see the beginnings of his triumph in this book. And then during this time when Jane Seymour is running the country. Not running the country, but as queen. His Henry's queen. And she's very mixed. Like, he was on her side, but, once she is queen, she starts to not trust Cromwell. Because it is suggested that he may have planted all the rumors about Anne having slept with a bunch of guys, including her brother, and committing incest. And we learn all about that in book 2, Anne's story, and how that did not happen. But anyway, and there is an author's note at the end, just like with A King's Obsession and The True Queen, there is an author's note where Alison Weir does talk about where she took liberties and what stuff isn't true. Like, there's a whole subplot in the beginning of the book where we find out that her older brother Edward, his wife Catherine, had because Edward, Jane's older brother, was neglectful of her, she ends up hooking up and is unkind to her. She ends up hooking up with the dad, which is so gross. And Edward ends up finding out that she strayed with his father, and that really puts a strain on the family. And she ends up having to go into the nunnery, which interesting is that in the beginning of the book, Jane does want to become a nun, but from what Alison Weir said, they don't know that for sure. See, the only reason, she took a lot of liberties in this book because, of course, you don't have a lot of Jane's letters. They don't know what she was really like. They're just guessing by the little bit of knowledge and information that we have, the little bit of evidence that they had about Jane Seymour. Like, we don't know for sure if she was that religious, or for sure if Catherine is Edward's Catherine had an affair with their dad. There's little hints of evidence, and there's also a debate about how Jane died. Spoiler alert: she died. So we don't know what really happened, and there's all this speculation, and there were all these theories about it. So of course Alison Weir has her own theories going by the evidence that she's found. she's interpreted, and has used that to write this book. So not everything is going to be 100% true. And I think, and of course, I personally think that complaining as long as a historical fiction author acknowledges that, and maybe does a little author's note, if you're going to write historical fiction based on real events, to let readers know that I did take liberties. I don't have enough evidence to write an accurate, 100% perfect, accurate story, but I'm taking what I've read about and turning it in fictionalizing, because it is fiction. This is a work of fiction. Just mixing it, blurring it with with fact as well. And I think that, first of all, I do agree with my friend Terry that Anne of Cleves was probably the luckiest one from what we know about her. But I think Jane, she, like, at least with Jane, Henry does love her. We do see that. I mean, like, it's a little bit improved compared to his obsession with Anne, because Jane is such a pure little sweetheart, at least in this book anyway. And she was in this really difficult place because she had to decide between, like, her family's ambition and her code of ethics, her moral beliefs. She was in a very moral quandary, a moral dilemma throughout the book. And, not just because her family wanted her to be queen, wanted a Seymour on the throne, but also, Anne was still around for a good while, and Anne was kind of, seen as bitchy and a mean girl, and Jane was such a good person, but she also felt sympathy for Anne, and didn't want her responsible for whatever was going to happen to Anne. But she also, she knew she could be a better queen for Henry, a better wife. And she didn't like how Anne treated Henry. So it was like, you have to decide, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to do to get what you want, to make someone, So it's kind of a very bittersweet, sad story as well, because it's just her being in this position. I would not want to be in this position because, like her, I would have a guilty conscience. And I probably feel more connected to her than I do the other two. I feel like she's the one I would probably be most like if I were in her position, if I were in that time period and in that situation. Though I would not want to die that early. That would suck. But like I said, I think the reason why she had a little bit better of situations because Henry at least loved her. And yeah, he lost his temper sometimes, but he was a little more gentle with her. And a little more loving and supportive. And, she had her haters back in the, because it was like, oh, all of a sudden you come along. Just like with Anne. But she was, but she was such a kind, sweet person that eventually she had more people that supported her and wanted to help her, including Cromwell. And I think she was just very much in a better position than Anne. Such that she, like I said, she was very, she kind of handled it better than Anne did. She wasn't, so her ambition didn't make her, like, hard and cold and selfish. She was willing to do what was, she was, like, even when she gave birth to her son Edward, she's like, okay, I can't suckle him myself. I gotta give him to the nurse. Which I feel kind of bad that, that you aren't, that a mom after she gives birth, she can't be the one to nurse her child. To me, that's really kind of sad. But then this is a different time period, and she had to make another heir eventually. Her and Henry had to get busy again to make more babies. And also she had the boy, so I think that really helped that she did have the child. The boy that he needed. So this is, like I said, bittersweet, a very sad story, but also very, it was a little happier, like, like Catherine's story, Catherine of Aragon, because there's two other Catherines, I think. There's other Catherines after the first Catherine. That is so confusing because everyone has this like either they're Catherine or they're Mary or or and I think there's also some more than one Anne too, and there's multiple Elizabeths and it's just very confusing all these people having the same names and the same with the guys. But anyway, I think, like I said, I think Anne is a very likable character. I definitely felt bad for her. Even though I think she had her situation was better than Anne's, but Anne kind of dug her own grave, I think, to some extent. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Jane Seymour, the Haunted Queen. And at some point, I'm gonna get to Anne of Cleves. I don't know when. I'm probably gonna put that on my wish list. Maybe I'll get it for my birthday. We will see. And if I don't get it for my birthday, I'll buy it myself. But anyway, I'm probably gonna give this to my aunt because she saw I had it and she's never read about Jane Seymour. Because you hear about Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn all the time, but you don't hear about some of the others' wives. There's very little about them. So she started to read this. So my mom is gonna go see my grandmother at some point soon. So I'm probably gonna send this with her so she can give it to my aunt. But anyway, I hope you like this review, and I will talk to you later. All right, bye.